Everybody good to go?
Yep.
All right. Item A, call to order. It is 6:02 PM on June 2, 2020. This is Mayor Rich Lansberg, and I would like to make clear for the record of this meeting, and it should be reflected in our minutes of this meeting, that this regular city council meeting of June 2, 2020 of the Woodland City Council will be conducted pursuant to Governor Newsom's executive order N-29-20. This meeting will be held via teleconference, and council members will participate via teleconference. This might be our last one, I think, right, Kim? Maybe.
Yeah, our goal to try to get back to getting the council at least to meet in person with limited controlled public access. So still might want to make sure we can confirm the logistics around that. Some cities have tried that and it didn't go as well as they'd hoped. So as soon as we feel confident we can conduct a smooth meeting, we will.
The locations of the council members are not listed on the agenda and are not accessible to the public. The public is encouraged to listen to the city council meeting live on Woodland TV channel 20 and also by going to the City of Woodland website at www.cityofwoodland.org/meetings. If a member of the public wishes to make a comment during the general public comment period or on a specific agenda item, there are two ways to do that. First, members of the public were invited to leave a voicemail message at 530-661-5900. All voicemail messages received by 6 p.m. tonight will be played during the city council meeting and read to the record at the appropriate time. Any member of the public watching the live stream who wishes to make a comment on an item as it is being heard may submit an email to the city clerk at councilmeetings@cityofwoodland.org prior to the public comment period on that item. Email comments submitted to be read into the record shall be no more than 3 minutes when read aloud. Please include the agenda item on the subject line. I'm going to item B, our closed session. Before we begin the regular agenda, council did meet in closed session and there is nothing to report at this time. Item C, recall to order. We will now begin the regular session. All come to order. Madam Clerk, we can move to item D, roll call. It would be appropriate for you to conduct a roll call. Each member must identify themselves during the roll call period.
Thank you, Mayor Landsberg. Councilmember Barajas?
Here.
Councilmember Fernandez?
Present.
Mayor Landsberg?
Present.
Councilmember Rodriguez?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Stallard?
Present.
Thank you. I would now like to ask each council member if they can hear me well. Mayor Pro Tem Stallard, can you hear me well?
Quite well, thank you.
Councilmember Barajas, can you hear me well?
Yes, I can.
Councilmember Rodriguez, can you hear me well?
Yes, thank you.
Councilmember Fernandez, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Thank you. And does each member of the council have a copy of the agenda for this meeting? Councilmember Stallard?
Yes, I do, thank you.
Councilmember Barajas?
Yes, thank you.
Councilmember Rodriguez?
Yes, thank you.
Councilmember Fernandez?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Madam City Clerk, have you posted the agenda at a location reasonably accessible to the public?
Yes, I have.
The record should reflect that all council members are present for this teleconference and have indicated they are able to hear the proceedings. At this time, I am requesting that other city officials introduce themselves and their positions so that the record can reflect their attendance at this meeting, starting with our interim city manager, Ken Hyatt.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, good evening. Ken Hyatt, interim city manager, is here.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council. This is Kara Uweta, City Attorney.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. This is Ana Gonzalez, City Clerk.
And Mr. Mayor, I do want to acknowledge the additional staff members that are also participating in this meeting. We have Derek Caff, Police Chief, Eric Zane, Fire Chief, Christine Engel, Community Services Director, Brent Meyer, Acting Community Development Director, Greg Locke, Public Works Director, Kim McKinney, Finance Officer, Scott Sowen, IT Manager, as well as Erica Bumgarner, Business Development Liaison.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Now, as we go through this agenda, I would request that before speaking, please identify yourself each time you speak. For example, this is Council Member Stallard, etc. Let the individuals speak and please do not interrupt. I would also ask that to the greatest extent possible, everyone mute their phones so we don't get any unnecessary background noise, including Mr. Stallard's grandchildren. I would now like to advise all council members, the city clerk, that any votes taken during this teleconference portion of this meeting must be taken by roll call. I would ask Madam Clerk to take that roll call for any and all votes. Now we'll begin with our agenda. Item E, the Pledge of Allegiance. If I could have Councilmember Rodriguez lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the
The
flag
flag
of the United
of the United
States of
States
America
of America,
and to the republic
For which
for
is
for
which
which
it stands,
stands
one
one
nation,
nation,
Nation under God,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
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 with
with
liberty
liberty and
and
justice for all.
for all.
Thank you, Councilmember Rodriguez. I'm now going to move to item F, public comment. Madam City Clerk, since the council chambers are closed to public, is there any member of the public who has submitted an email or left a voicemail for the general public comment portion of our meeting?
In Mansburg, this evening, I would like to read an email that was actually left at the last council meeting, but it was literally 1 minute before you adjourned the meeting. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to read the email that came through.
Please.
Thank you. What is the city council doing to create an atmosphere and environment that drives new consumers as well as recruit new businesses to come to our great city? Based on the long-term projections in the coming 2 to 5 years, there is not enough employee budget cuts or pay wage reductions that would cover the projected gap. So I think there needs to be focus on how we are going to encourage more business in the coming years rather than how we are going to reduce staffing or budgets for the city departments. Thank you for your time. Erica Keller.
Thank you. Do you have any other emails or voicemails?
No.
Thank you. That takes us to item G, council and staff statements. I'm going to start with Mayor Pro Tem Stallard.
Thank you, Mayor Landsberg. Couple things. I'd just like to mention that item 12 tonight is asking us to sign on to a letter initiated by the Woodland Joint Unified School District and others who participate in our 2x3x2 process. The letter calls for state and federal assistance for enhanced broadband and better internet access, more of a social justice thing. The schools have been dealing with having to get more kids online during the shutdown, the COVID shutdown. So Councilmember Rodriguez and I participated in the last meeting. We agreed this was a good thing and we endorse it for all the council. Beyond that, I want to mention that all the regular meetings that I'm assigned to attend, I've been attending by Zoom conference call. Things are going along reasonably well, all things considered. I want to say that I attended the First Street dinner last Saturday, and I thought it was a fine event and a good way to get our people back downtown. Valley Clean Energy budget, unfortunately, is looking poorly at the moment. We may be having to use our reserves to essentially balance our budget this year. Also, I participated in a prosperity strategy webinar put on by Greater Sacramento Economic Council, Sacramento Metro Chamber, Valley Vision, and others. We have a economic strategy to take us forward in this post-recessionary period. We hope it's post-recessionary. We're going to focus on three key sectors in the region. The first is totally applicable to us, and that's agriculture. The second is healthcare, and the third is the mobility sector. We have a rather remarkable facility out at Sac State that's working on future generations of mobility, cars in particular, self-driving and the like. The other three strategies are non-industry as such. One of them is jobs. I can't quite remember the other two. But I want to mention that we're working on it, particularly in light of the comment we received just a few moments ago. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Stallard. Councilmember Rodriguez, please.
Thank you, Mayor Landsberg. I want to thank our staff and police and fire chief for our meeting on our public safety subcommittee meeting this past week, where we looked at addressing the needs of the community here in the near future, the next few months and the year to come. And in the face of the dual pandemic, we looked at what the budget restrictions will mean for our department. So I just want to thank them, and I know they're working on getting on that same page along with all the other departments to meet our budget needs. Secondly, I want to take this moment to congratulate Zarya Williamson. She is homeschooled and she graduates today with the class of 2020 under the Visions in Education Preparatory Graduate Program. She's going to be attending Woodland Community College for 2 years, and then she's going to be transferring to UCLA to obtain a degree in film. And I'm going to try to show this photo, see if you can get a good look at her today. Sergeant Dallas Hyde joined family, friends, and I on a little drive-by celebration for Zarya. So congratulations to her and her family. And finally, Mr. Mayor, I want to send my condolences to George Floyd's family and to the community out there, to know that we stand by them, and we know they are seeking justice, and we understand their pain and want to make sure that we're working with them to ensure that we're squashing any acts of racism out there, because we want to make sure that we are working together and empowering our communities, and to make sure that we all have a fair choice, a fair say in everything we do. I know, Mr. Mayor, you have a statement prepared, but I just want to end by telling folks who are out there protesting, that are using violent means and destroying some of our memorials out there at the Capitol, to just to please back off, to let the families grieve, to let the communities push through and seek justice. And that violence only perpetuates negativity. So we want to make sure that we're moving forward peacefully. And I know it's difficult, and I can't imagine being in the shoes of the African American community, but I stand with them. I'm a full ally, and I don't condone any acts of racism or discrimination. And I want to make sure that my condolences are sent to the family and the community out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Rodriguez. Councilmember Barajas.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I attended the VCEA meeting, and just like Councilmember Stollard said, our budget doesn't look too good, and unfortunately, we might have to dip into some of the reserves, and we'll be giving an update to the council in a couple weeks from now. I did attend the George Floyd protest here, nonviolent protest here in Woodland with fellow council members and Mayor Rich Landsberg. Is very peaceful. The community was in huge support of just being out there in solidarity with the family and the community for George Floyd. Unfortunately, I'm deeply saddened and actually angry regarding his death. And this is something that has been happening for hundreds of years here in the United States, especially for African American communities and underrepresented communities and communities of color. And when you have a police force that has authority and discretionary power to the fullest, you're going to have a lot of bad apples in some departments. And what we need to do is look at every department and really go after those bad apples. If not, this is going to continue. We have to change the culture. We have to change it at the policy level. We have to change the culture at the police department level. We have to organize, we have to mobilize, and we have to demand. And so I stand firm in support of George Floyd's family, the community, and we have to take action. And that means here in Woodland too. If we have bad apples, we have to go after those individuals. So that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Barajas. Councilmember Fernandez.
Thank you, Mayor Landsberg. Yeah, I just want to report that I, along with the Brett Meyer, the Community Development Director, and the Ken Hyatt, the interim city manager, have been having ongoing discussions with the Yolo County Transit District staff related to some budgetary issues, particularly related to matters that require us ensuring that Woodland receives its proportionate share of services. And one of the key issues that we're also looking at beyond that is prioritizing the relocation of the transit center to location closer to downtown Woodland. Beyond that, you know, in the tragedy that our nation and our world is facing with the racial injustices that occur and that are highlighted by and, you know, elicited and provoked by the killing of George Floyd, you know, I think that every community, including our own, needs to look at the way we not only police our communities, but the way in which we reach out and provide services to marginalized and historically marginalized people and communities, you know, sub-communities within our own community. You know, this isn't just a racial or criminal justice issue. This is very much, and this highlights very much an economic issue and economic inequality throughout our nation and our world. And so, you know, it would be meaningful for us as a city to look at ways we can promote healthy economic services to not only minority business owners, but aspiring entrepreneurs or people who are looking to revitalize certain overlooked portions of our community. You know, community development corporations are a great way for you know, a non-city entity to assist in uplifting you know, overlooked portions of a community. And so I think that'd be a worthwhile endeavor. It's something I'm looking into in Woodland. And so hopefully we can serve the greater good through such an entity. But that closes my remarks, and I have endorsed what all of our council members have relayed with regards to this issue, and look forward to the mayor's comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fernandez. Even though our city is struggling to get back on its feet, dealing with the effects of COVID-19, our city is now facing an even greater challenge. This last week has raised concerns about the fate of our state and our country as we try to understand and live with the consequences of the senseless murder of George Floyd in Minnesota. This last weekend, Council participated in a very vocal but peaceful vigil decrying the brutal killing of George Floyd. It was evident that our young people have tremendous energy. I wish to acknowledge and thank those young people who demonstrated the last couple of evenings and proved that they can convey their message without the need to commit acts of violence or acts of vandalism or acts of theft. Now it is up to us to engage these young people and encourage them to focus on what can be accomplished with that energy. Our hope is that our young people take this positive energy, which has consumed our nation this past week, and use it to make a difference in their community. Take this fire in your souls to bring to us together in a way that we've never been together. Don't use that energy to burn and destroy, but to build upon Dr. King's plea that we must all learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we will all perish together as fools. This is one of the reasons our city focuses on our youth with programs and resources and commitments to keep them in school, to keep them safe, and to provide a future for all of them. Today, all across the United States, major streaming services, including Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and YouTube Music, have pledged their support for Blackout Tuesday. Today, each of these services will add 8 minutes and 46 seconds of silence to their playlist. This is the length of time George Floyd had the weight of authority on his neck. The campaign is aimed at protesting violence and racism, as well as honoring the memory of George Floyd. For that reason, at the end of tonight's meeting, and right before we adjourn, I will be asking council and staff to remain silent for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I know this will be uncomfortable, as it should be uncomfortable. During this time of reflection, I ask that we ponder the state of our country and the divisiveness of our politic. Just think about the amount of time it took to snuff the life out of George Floyd. Think about what we can do as a city to bring an end to any injustices for the Black community and for all of our community. At the end of the 8 minutes and 46 seconds and 6 seconds, we will be adjourned. Mr. City Manager, your turn.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I think I'll focus my comments, remarks, kind of in the same vein, and really, during this extremely emotional and deeply troubling time, I want to assure both the council, the community, that we were taking every step and every measure internally to work within our staff, reflect upon our programs, our services, our training, our protocols, to ensure that what we witnessed last week and over the course really of the last several years repeatedly does not repeat itself in our community. So you have my dedication, I believe the dedication of the chief and the entire police department, that in no way do they intend or desire similar outcome in our community. And you have our full faith and commitment to ensure that we can do whatever we can to prevent that from occurring. So that will be the totality of my remarks. Long-range calendar, real quickly. Looking forward to the last meeting of our fiscal year, June 16th. As tradition would have it, we'll have the adoption of the 2021 budget after a review and introduction of it this evening. We will also have board and commission appointments. So we do have many vacancies across a lot of our boards and commissions. And we've received, thankfully, successful applications to fill those appointments. So we'll be reviewing those with the subcommittee and presenting those recommendations at your next meeting. We also will be having the ordinance to hopefully adopt the Measure J renewal ballot measure, along with the resolution calling for election for the companion advisory measures for you. And then lastly, we will have the homeless shelter bid award, as well as the accompanying agreements to move forward with that project. As my communication over the weekend indicated, while we had hoped to have that on tonight's agenda, we are still working through some final construction cost adjustments and value engineering, as well as the final funding gap for that project. Confident that we will be able to work through those and present to you on the 16th project proposal in partnership with both the county and the Friends of the Mission and Fourth and Hope, a successful project that will move forward immediately with our contractor that bid on the project. So that concludes my remarks. Turn it back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. We're now going to turn to item H3, a presentation from Yolo County Assessor Clerk Jesse Salinas. Are you on the horn there, Jesse?
I sure am. How are you, everyone? Good evening.
Good to hear from you. I hope you bring us joyous news.
Well, I will do my best to tell you what's going on in the election world. First of all, thank you for your leadership during these difficult times. And I know there's a lot happening in our, not only in our community, but our society as a whole. So again, thank you for your leadership and your sensitivity to all that we're dealing with between COVID and the issues related around George Floyd. So thank you. Thank you very much for this time to come and talk to you about what's going to be happening for November. Again, Jesse Salinas, I am the Yolo County Assessor, Clerk, Recorder, and Register of Voters. And I'm coming today to you to share about wearing my hat as a registrar about what's going to be taking place for the November election and to ask for your assistance. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of changes that we're trying to make in preparing for the November election. We have COVID-19 that, of course, will likely be here, and we are fully anticipating that there may be a second wave that hits in the fall. So as we plan in the elections, the motto that I've prepared my staff for is we hope for the best, but plan for the worst. So we have to be prepared that there will be a second wave that may be equal or even worse than the first wave that we saw. And it's important for me to give you some context here. If you recall, our March election on March 3rd really was at the very tip of the announcement that there was a pandemic that was striking Northern California or the United States, but in particular Northern California. And we are thankful that our election was on March 3rd. The news about COVID-19 started to break really that morning, and people started to get anxious about it, but it was at the very beginning. We hadn't even have a full knowledge of what was to come. And the morning of the election on Tuesday, March 3rd, I had typically I'll have about a cancellation of about 5% of my poll workers that takes place. And it turned out on Tuesday morning, we were scrambling because double that percentage, 10% of my poll workers canceled on us. And of my, what we called our supervisors, our poll worker supervisors, which are the people that are the more experienced poll workers in the sites that we have, 15% of them canceled. And so when I think about that, it was a huge percentage when typically we get around 5%. So it sent us scrambling, trying to fill up those spots that morning. And keep in mind that I have a backlog of about 50 that I am prepared to tap into, that I have as a waiting list of people that I can turn to in the morning of the elections, because we expect about a 5%, but it was more than that. So in anticipation that we have a lot of challenges staffing wise, and let me make another special note for you, is traditionally our poll workers are typically people who are individuals that are more than 65 years of age. And so they would be what's qualified in the more higher risk category for COVID-19. So, and that is the vast majority of all of our poll workers. So again, we have multiple challenges, not only with respect to COVID-19 for the fall, but there are major changes on the horizon in terms of direction that's being handed down from the state. I don't know how many of you were aware, but the governor issued an executive order a few weeks back saying that he is expecting us to have an all vote by mail option available and to provide that to all registered voters in the county. On top of it, there is quite a bit of movement about providing some in-person voting options as well. Because what we know is there are certain individuals that need assistance, in-person assistance, and we also know there are certain populations, whether it be younger populations or certain communities that may have disability issues that have difficulty utilizing a vote by mail option, or even language issues, that there needs to be some in-person options available. what's coming down from the state, and you will likely see an executive order coming out tomorrow morning on this topic, because that's the latest news that I have on this, is that there's going to be some new guidelines being provided of what that's going to look like. And that likely there will be legislation following shortly thereafter to codify what the governor is about to release tomorrow morning. But what's coming down from the state is that we need to provide some in-person options, but what that will look like will be very different than the past elections. Because of COVID, the ability to have all the polling places we've had in the past just will not be possible. We are expecting a lot of poll workers not to be made available or to allow themselves to be available to us if we are in that span of a second wave. We also have issues related to physical distancing that we're going to have to grapple with. Plus, the modeling of what we're talking about is really a modeling towards not a polling place, but something I would call a voter assistance center. And so there's something similar to this model that's in Sacramento County. They call them vote centers, but that's the previous model, which was there were 14 to 15 counties that did that statewide in the last election. We are looking to do something similar, although it's not exactly that model, but it'll allow for these voter assistance centers to be available in different parts of the county. And so what I'm asking and reaching out to each of the jurisdictions, and Woodland is the first one that I'm actually making this presentation to. I do see these changes, and they are going to be dramatic changes in our election process, as opportunities. You know, during these moments of crisis, I see them as opportunities for us to engage our community in ways that we've never done before. So what I'm looking to do with the city of Woodland and all the jurisdictions, but starting off here, is to ask you to assist me in putting together a community working group. These individuals, and I'd like to be able to help us build and connect in the community by helping us to identify locations. When this executive order comes out, I'll get a sense of how many locations we will need to provide throughout the county. But I'm going to need some assistance in identifying and getting some advice on what those locations should be, because they have to meet certain criteria, and my staff and my team will be working closely with this group to help guide them on those criteria. We would need some assistance in engaging and including diverse language groups and people with disabilities. I want to really use this opportunity to engage our Woodland community members in ways that have never been done before as part of this election process. We also need assistance with messaging, because we're going to need to reach out into the community, again, in ways that we've never done before. But I know working in partnership with the city, we can do something that is really phenomenal and make something happen that's never happened before in Yolo County. You can also help us with developing and identifying volunteers. We would love to have younger volunteers, and the model that we're talking about is going to require probably more technology, because it's going to be a different model than we've had at traditional polling places. So having people who are more comfortable with technology would be a big asset as well. And again, diversifying our volunteer base would be incredibly helpful in our process. And I wanted to share with you that what's likely to come out is we're talking about providing a polling location, even though it's fewer polling locations. I'm looking at doing it over time, over an extended period of time. We'll see how many days it'll be needed to meet the state guidelines. But at the very least, I'm looking if I can manage it, is being able to do it over a 3 to 4 day period. And so that would be including elections, of course, if that's something that we can do and is consistent with the state guidelines. So people don't have to all show up on election day. They will be given other options. And that's what I'm anticipating will be coming down from the state. But I will be working, and just so all of you know, I've been in conversations over the past 3 weeks with the Secretary of State's office, the governor's office, and the consultants that lead the election committees on both the Senate and the Assembly. So been very fortunate to be at the table having these discussions, and at the same time trying to think about how this model will work here in Yolo County in a way that really elevates us to another level. So I'm hoping I could have some feedback from the city council and the city manager about either having a staff liaison or maybe and/or city council member liaison to help me put this community working group together. I have staff already assigned, ready to facilitate and assist in our interactions with this working group here in Woodland, so that we can help facilitate any discussions and share all the information that's needed to really guide this group accordingly. So with that, and she's currently listening in. My staff person is Catherine Campos, who will be leading this in my office, and she's listening in as well on this conversation. So hopefully, if there's questions that I can answer, or just wanted to open it up to the city council. And again, thanking you for your time and hopefully assistance in partnering with me in making this a successful election in November.
Thank you, Mr. Salinas. Does any member of the council have a question or comment for Mr. Salinas on this topic?
Mr. Mayor, this is Councilmember Rodriguez.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Salinas. It's good to hear from you and to have you here presenting tonight. I want to know, for the purposes of recruiting folks to participate in this effort, do we have a timeline on how soon we can start engaging these volunteers? I imagine you're going to do your presentations throughout the county, but do you have a timeline in mind for when we can, if we reach out to folks, that we can provide them with a kind of the situational timeline of what this is going to look like?
Well, the key is when the shoe drops from the governor's office and that executive order, that'll be the framework that we'll be using to know how many locations we'll be talking about and the duration. So those are key elements that I should know literally in the next 24 to 48 hours. Once I have that, then I can start to put a framework together of what we need to do and have happen. So immediately after that, I'm looking in the next week or so, to be able to start reaching out to these folks. I would need to have these locations, at least the locations, identified before the end of summer, because I need to be able to advertise for them. I need to make sure that they're locked in, they meet all our requirements. So for me, as a timeline, I need this group put together in the next few weeks so that we can start meeting later this month, with meetings through July, with an ability to have the locations and the outreach effort in that first initial phase done this part of summer. And then it's transitioning through the election process, because we need to then work on the messaging. We need to help educate people about how the vote by mail process works, so people understand, this is a viable option for you. And really helping to deliver that messaging to the diverse communities that we have throughout Woodland. And then being able to then transition about, okay, now let's get once we've done that, how does the vote center, what's that going to look like, and how do we communicate that message? So this group that we would be working with would hit the ground running right away and start working with us through the summer and up until election day. To include, if they're willing to volunteer and help us out, then they can be a poll worker on election day as well. So, whatever they can do to help will be all the way through election period. Does that give you a good timeline of different things?
Yes, thank you. And then just one last thing, more of a comment. I know there's some folks out there hopeful for the poll voting. I imagine that a lot of our senior community, of course, likes to go to the polls. And I was wondering if you've gotten any inquiries or requests from the public on from our senior community as far as what that would look like for them.
So I would like to see those individuals as part of this advisory group, this working group that we're talking about, because we do need to hear their voice. We need to, that's the locations at which, however many we're providing, that it is accessible to the seniors so that they feel comfortable going in person if that's what they so choose to do. And you got to think about all it's got to be a big enough facility that we can deal with that physical distancing, right? And so I've got plans and how we can, and we'll be working with the working group as well to figure out how we provide those safety measures so people who do show up in person feel that they're in as safe an environment as possible, and they can feel confident that we're doing everything in our powers to keep them safe and well in the voting experience.
Thank you very much. Rest assured, if I find community members out there, of course, of different age ranges and backgrounds, and bilingual, trilingual, whatever will help get the message out. We'll start identifying them for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other member have a
Mr. Mayor.
comment or question?
Councilmember Fernandez, if I could.
Please.
Jesse, appreciate your diligence in moving forward. I mean, it's going to be quite the task to be prepared for November. I mean, it's about 6 months away now. So, I'm happy to help you however I can. And if you'll have me, I don't mind being a part of any working group that you would like to put together for Woodlands. This is more than a noble cause. So if you want to count on my assistance throughout this process, I'd love to work with you again.
Oh, thank you, Councilmember Fernandez. Your involvement would be greatly appreciated. So thank you. And thank you, Councilmember Rodriguez, for your willingness to help recruit. It is also very much appreciated.
Any other council member have a question or comment for Mr. Salinas?
Rich, I would, this is Mayor Pro Tem Stallard. I would just like to thank Jesse for the briefing. Obviously, there's lots of ramifications for our current challenges, and a lot of them are focused on the things he does for us that are so important for our community. So I appreciate the briefing. I appreciate the assistance offered by my colleagues, and I'll try to be helpful any way I can as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Stallard. Thank you for your support.
Yeah, same here, Jesse. Thank you for the report. Appreciate it. I won't be running an election this November, but you can count on me at least volunteering and helping out as much as I can. So just reach out to me and let me know what I can do.
Thank you, Councilmember Badajas. Thank you.
I have a question for you, Mr. Salinas.
Sure.
When you mentioned the 3 or 4 days, are we going to be able to vote over a 3 or 4 day period of time, or are you just providing services for that period of time?
So yes, so the model that I'm looking at implementing, again, assuming the resources are there to do it, and I think I can pull this off if we can get some direction from the state and we can make the finances work, is that I'm looking at having, and what's coming down in discussions right now from the state is providing like a Saturday, Sunday, Monday 8-hour offering for people to walk into one of these voter assistance centers and be able to vote. It doesn't mean that the vote will be counted at that point. It will be processed and collected. We cannot actually count votes until after 8 o'clock on election night, until all the polls have closed. But they can at least go through that process of getting a ballot and actually voting officially on those earlier days. And of course, because of the vote by mail process, people do that all the time. We are slated to send out our vote by mail mailings at 29 days before the election day. And of course, some of you will get it, a few days after that, and others a week, depending on how the mail processes and gets to your doorstep. But people can, as soon as they get the vote by mail, they can fill it out and submit it early there that way as well. So all those votes will be processed accordingly, but they will not be counted until 8 o'clock on election night.
Thank you. I hate to put you on the spot, but you mentioned mail voting. There's been a lot of negative comments made recently about mail-in voting. Can you tell us the history of mail-in voting here in Yolo County and whether or not people actually take advantage of that?
So percentage-wise, I wish I had the presentation right in front of me, but we have, over the past 12 years, become a much more vote by mail county, because we were down to, I think it was below 30% 12 years ago. And at this point, countywide, we're at somewhere around, I believe the latest number in March was 73%. So 73% of our voters vote by mail currently. And that's a pretty significant percentage. So us going to 100% is not that big a jump for us. So we're talking about the last 27%. And so as part of the executive order, as I mentioned, everybody will get a vote by mail ballot. And I know one of the questions has come up related to vote by mail is issues related to people getting multiple copies of their vote by mail. And I'm just going to share with you, there's multiple reasons that that could be the case. A classic example is, if somebody has actually moved and we haven't gotten the updated records, and then they go and say, hey, can you send it to here? And what the timing of that mailing that's gone out from our printer is at, like I said, 29 days before, 29 days prior. And if they've changed addresses, there's going to be 2 ballots that go out. But the good news that I can share with you, and even when people actually go on vacation, because we have helped people who have said, hey, I'm on vacation, I'm going to, New York or Hawaii, wherever they may be going out of state, we send them to that location, their ballots. But if they go home, their first one is, what we do is we void the first one, and the second one is the one that will count because we sent them a second one. But in either case, nobody gets to have a ballot that's counted more than once. As part of our process, we will actually go through it on the back end, which is in the processing of verifying signatures and verifying that there is actually only one vote cast by that individual. So I know it was a little bit more than you wanted on the vote by mail, but I just wanted to take that opportunity to share with you a little bit more about that background.
I appreciate that. So what you're telling us, there's no Chicago style voting here in Yolo County.
You got it. No Chicago style. And in fact, as you know, I've tried to be as transparent as possible, and have always invited the public to see firsthand our processing here at the YOLO elections office. So we have an open door policy. You just have to come and sign in, because if we have live ballots, you have to sign in once that time period begins. But anybody's welcome to view our process and to see that everything is above board, and integrity and the quality of our efforts are for everyone to see.
Thank you, Mr. Salinas. Are there any other questions or comments? Madam Clerk, are there any questions or comments from the public?
I do have an email for Mr. Salinas.
Go
And read it. Thank you for your work, Mr. Salinas. I have 2 questions. 1, how many poll workers do you typically need in Woodland when we are not in a pandemic? And 2, how many motor assistance center workers do you anticipate you will need in Woodland in November? I'm most curious about the percentage increase. Thank you again for your creative approach and organization of the new model. Sarah Monley.
So I don't have the Woodland specific numbers. I can tell you that I have typically countywide 390 poll workers that I have stationed at all the polling places throughout the county. I've actually never done a Woodland specific breakdown of it. I can probably get that at some point if they're interested, and they can always contact my office if they want to hear more of those specifics at the yoloelections.org. But they can contact me and I can provide that information following this. So the question is that not only the Woodland piece, so there's quite a few that are Woodland poll workers. How many I'm going to need for Woodland in terms of the new model, I don't know yet, because I don't know how many polling locations that are going to be required to be provided in Woodland until the executive order comes down and ultimately the legislation. But from what I understand, the executive order is the lead on this piece, but that there is likely to be good alignment between the executive order and what's coming down from the legislature in terms of the what's called a ratio per registered voter. So that's kind of the numbers that people are looking at, and there seems to be some alignment happening on that figure. But again, I won't know until I see that. So I can't answer that second question because I don't know how many locations we're going to have. Each location right now, if we're talking voter assistance, will have to have at a minimum 7 to 8 people, but it'll probably likely need more than that because I'll need to deal with social distancing. And this is part of what I need to hear from the working group. To make this a safe location, how many people do I need to have outside managing the line? How many do I need to have that's making sure people are respecting the physical distancing and making sure people are following the guidelines that we have in place. Those are all part of the pieces that I want to have a dynamic conversation with the working group to make sure that we've looked at all those elements. So I can't quite answer that second one, and I can get back to them on the specifics of the Woodland number in particular if they'd like that at a later time. But they can always email me at jesse.salinas@yolocounty.org to email me that question, and I will make sure that I can respond back to them on that Woodland number in particular if they're still interested in that. But the model is fundamentally changing, and I can envision, given this dramatic change, it's likely to, if all goes well, which I'm anticipating it will, with the support of the community, the way we're talking, that this will be a model that may likely carry forward for years to come. Because if it goes as we all hope, that there's some good things that can come out of it, having multiple days of options for people.
Madam Clerk, on any other emails or phone calls?
No.
Thank you. Ms. Salinas, I want to thank you for your presentation tonight. Very informative. It's good to see you.
Mayor Landsberg, thank you for your time, and council members, thank you again for your time. And hopefully we'll be able to be at some point in the near future, be able to be not via Zoom or the video, the Cisco WebEx that you're using, that we'll have an opportunity to be in person sometime in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Mr. City Manager, I have a question for you on this.
Yes.
It appears that Councilmember Enrique Fernandez has volunteered services for this group that would represent the council. Would it be appropriate to nominate him, make a motion of it?
Yeah, I think, it's probably appropriate for the council to acknowledge Councilmember Fernandez's interest and consent to his participation. I don't know how formal it needs to be, but we can bring back something more formal if necessary after consultation with City Attorney next week.
Let's do that. If Councilmember Fernandez is willing to do that, well, I'm willing to put him up as our liaison for Mr. Salinas' group.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Mayor Landsberg, one quick question for you. Is there an interest in wanting to have a staff person that can also serve as a liaison? So if we need to interface with the city, that we can do that as well, please?
On that topic, let us talk to our city manager, see how we do that. Right now, I'm just interested in looking at one of our members, work with your group though, Jesse. But as far as staffing is concerned, let's take a closer look at that. We'll get back to you in the next few days. Sound reasonable, Mr. Hyatt?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I've already sort of written down some names I think would be a good fit, and we'll follow up and certainly reach out to Jesse with some contacts.
Great.
I think we can accommodate.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Ken, appreciate it.
All right, good topic. That's going to take us to item I, the consent calendar, items 4 through 12. Does any member of the council wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? Hearing none, is there a motion regarding the consent calendar?
Move to
Councilmember
approve.
Rodriguez, I'll second.
Sounds like the motion was by Barajas and seconded by Rodriguez. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes.
The motion by Barajas, seconded by Rodriguez. Madam Clerk, we have a voice vote on the
Yes.
consent calendar, please.
I will now take a roll call vote. Councilmember Barajas,
Yes.
Councilmember Fernandez,
Yes.
Mayor Landsberg,
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Stallard.
Yes.
Thank you. The consent calendar, items number 4 through 12 carry on a 5-0 roll call vote.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you.
That takes us to item J, reports to city manager, items 13 and 14. Mr. Hyatt, do you wish to start with number 13, the update on the COVID-19?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, if you would allow, I'd do a brief update on COVID. And really, I'll start with some metrics. As of this evening, we have 213 confirmed cases now in Yolo County, of which 96 are associated with Woodland. We do have now 24 deaths countywide, so a slight uptick from last week, but overall, continue to see a very positive trend in terms of very flat community spread of cases throughout not just Woodland here, but also the county. And that with the fact that we have had a testing center stood up here within Woodland for the last 3.5 weeks. Did conclude this past Saturday. In total, over the duration, there were 1,600 plus tests that were conducted, resulting in about 17 confirmed positive COVID cases here. Those were not just Woodland residents. Those were tests available to residents throughout the county and actually even beyond. So I believe about half of the tests that were conducted were of Woodland residents here. That testing center has now been relocated and stood up in West Sacramento, where it will be for another 2 weeks, I believe, and then moved on to another county. Last week, I think the council is well aware that we had significant progress relative to transitioning into phase 2, with the Yolo County Board of Supervisors receiving word from the state that the county's attestation document was approved. And on the heels of that, the Board of Supervisors gave direction to the health officer to modify the county health order and ultimately lifting the Yolo County shelter-in-place order by midweek last week. The county is now in a position where they can proceed concurrent with the state's modification to their health order and modification to business and activity restrictions. So as the state is now releasing additional activities and business openings, the county health officer has the authority to modify and allow those to proceed. They did that last week, authorizing non-essential retail to open up, dine-in, restaurants to operate again, and then also included the religious services with some restrictions to allow to return to operation. So with that, we have been fairly busy over the past week. In fact, the next item on the agenda is in response to that. Now that businesses are learning what operating under the new order looks like from the county as well as the state, there are significant restrictions in many respects with respect to how they can operate their businesses, specifically to dine-in restaurants. There's restrictions relative to seating that modify and do restrict how much seating they can have. So many communities across the state have allowed temporary outdoor dining opportunities, as well as small business expansion into the public right-of-way and even on private properties. And so the item just after this one is our proposal to sort of follow suit and allow some flexibility with where we allow expanded business activities to occur to support those businesses that have been impacted. And then lastly, I do want to point out this week with the lifting of some of the orders and returning to some of the office, non-essential office being allowed under the state health order, we did return some of the workforce here within the city to work, including the initial phased opening of several facilities, starting with City Hall this week. On June 1st, we opened up the public finance counter that will follow suit next week on the 8th, with the community development permit and business license counter opening up again to the public. Police department public counter as well opened up this week. And then also the library started expanding some services beyond their virtual services that have been provided by allowing drop-off this week. And then next Monday, they will be providing curbside pickup for library patrons. So a slow return to operations here within the city. The community center is still closed to the public. We do have staff working in the community center building. But due to the nature of the activities that occur there, naturally not being allowed still under the state health order, the facility there is still closed to the public. We are working with our rec department. We do have programs planned to start next week for the Summertime Fun Club. Again, following very closely to the state guidance relative to how to conduct those group recreational activities consistent with the state. So those will start hopefully by Monday of next week. And then we've also been working closely with other recreation clubs and groups within the community that are anxious to get their members back up and running again. And we're watching very closely to see what the state health order does with respect to allowing the gradual return of recreational programming to occur, both programs that the city runs as well as our local youth organizations. So more to follow on that. We hope by the end of the week to see something from the governor's office announcing some minimal, likely not full return to recreation, but some allowed activities with modified restrictions on how to operate. So that concludes a report on COVID-19. I'll turn it back to the council if you have any questions relative to where we're at with managing the pandemic and preparing for returning back to normal.
Thank you, Mr. Hyatt. Is there any member of the council that wishes to make a comment or have a question for Mr. Hyatt? Yes, Mr. Stallard.
Yeah, it's Mayor Pro Tem Tom Stallard. Mr. City Manager, we did get a letter today from the Woodland swim team board president, asking for us to get our pool complex back in service for lap swimming, and mentioning that such is apparently occurring in Santa Clara County. Do you know what path we might be able to proceed in order to get that pool available to those who want to lap swim in our city?
Yes, Councilmember Stallard. So we've been working fairly closely both with the county as well as director of the swim team. We believe we have a plan and protocols in place. As soon as the state clarifies or modifies their health order, to date, the feedback from the state that we've received is that public pools are expressly not allowed to operate yet. However, I think in the communication you received, there was an indication that some counties have found a path to allow those in a modified format to proceed. So we will be investigating that to see if there were some variants that somehow they were able to achieve through that process. And we will work through the county health office to ensure that we won't violate any health orders that they may be tracking. But I believe hopefully within the next several weeks, we will be able to work that out and get the swim team access to the Brooks pool.
Thank you very much.
Any other
questions? Councilmember Fernandez.
Yes, Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager, I've got a couple of questions with some sub-questions. First, and I don't know if any other members of the council received the email from Alyssa Meyer from the managing attorney over at Lisnick, but she was looking for information on the urgency ordinance which enacted the temporary moratorium on evictions for renters, which expired as of May 17th, unless it was extended by the Director of Emergency Services. So can you provide an update on that? And whether, I don't believe we extended that moratorium, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So the council's urgency ordinance moratorium restricting residential evictions expired after, I believe, 60 days from when it was enacted. So it expired about a week ago. In consultation with the city attorney, given the court's position relative to taking up unlawful detainers, we felt, wasn't necessary. However, I did communicate with Alyssa Meyer today and asked for her perspective on whether reinstituting that would be beneficial in any capacity beyond that, which we were aware. So we are going to communicate tomorrow, and if we feel it's beneficial to our local renters here in town, we could bring back the June 16th meeting, potential item for the council to take up.
Okay, I'll just chime in here, provide a comment. I think until we get back to full speed, I mean, we should seriously look at providing as much reprieve for those on the fringe of homelessness. And then my second question is related to the looming double spike or second spike in the fall of COVID-19. Could you give the council a bit of insight into what we're doing from the city's perspective to ensure that the public would be prepared for that? I mean, have we started planning, et cetera? Could you kind of dive into that, Ken?
Yeah, I think, haven't honestly focused a significant amount on what that's going to look like in the fall if we start to see a resurgence. I think, right, the most important thing is for us to have a robust testing and tracing platform in place, and the county health officer is working actively on providing a program and the resources necessary to be able to, in a robust fashion, track the community spread as we transition into the fall, manage that. But, as you are well aware, right, if we start to see a negative trend and more positive cases here within our community, the county health officer clearly has the ability, to reinstitute the shelter in place and help to minimize the spread of that. So, I think the effectiveness of that approach proved itself over the spring, and I think that would be a primary strategy. Minimizing contact and spread of the virus is largely going to be a measure of how diligent our community is in adhering to the ongoing health order guidance relative to masking and social distancing and sanitation. And continue, if you feel like you are compromised or at risk, to continue to, minimize any activity outside of the home where possible. So it's one where we will continue to engage with the health officer and, rely on a lot of the metrics that they're tracking, but be hopefully in a position to respond quickly should we see a trend back towards a higher case presence here in the community.
Okay, thanks, Ken. I think this is a unique situation where we're provided, pretty quickly an opportunity, more likely than not, to act in a more efficient, more productive manner if things proceed as suspected in the fall. I mean, I'm concerned about that. I'm concerned about what the city could potentially do better the second time around. And, like our assessor clerk recorder, Jesse Salinas, suggested or commented, it's best to be optimistic, but prepare for the worst. So, I mean, I would definitely urge the council and staff to start assessing how we can move forward to prepare for the worst case scenario so that we can better position our community to thrive through this, potentially, difficult fall and winter. But that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fernandez. Any other comments or questions from council members? Okay, thank you, Mr. Hyatt. That's going to take us to item J14, the urgency ordinance on the outdoor restaurant seating.
Yeah, so just real quick, again, set the stage here, and then Erica Bumgarner is here to walk you through the actual ordinance that's before you. But this item, we believe, will provide some flexibility to our local business community to expand their businesses compliant with the health order, to ensure appropriate distancing and sanitation, and is a good gesture towards supporting those impacted businesses within our community. And We've already begun to receive interest from particularly restaurants, naturally, as they're the ones that are most constrained by the orders, we believe. So I will turn it over to Erica and walk you through the proposed ordinance and the duration that we propose to have it in effect.
All right, thank you and good evening, Mayor Landsberg, members of council. This is Erica Baumgartner, Business Development Liaison. Hoping everybody can hear me. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So the item before you, as Ken mentioned, is an urgency ordinance to grant temporary use permits that will allow restaurants and other businesses to use public as well as private outdoor space to meet the physical distancing requirements that local and state ordinance now requires for restaurants and retailers as they are permitted to reopen. The temporary permit will allow restaurants and even some retailers the ability to expand essentially their square footage by expanding seating and possibly display areas outdoors, either on public sidewalks or in private parking lots where a couple of parking spaces can be temporarily converted to create an outdoor patio, outdoor seating area. This policy, again, will help restaurants comply with that social distancing requirement indoors, where they are required to reduce their seating capacity fairly substantially, actually, to meet state guidelines by providing that additional dining capacity outdoor to serve their customers. The permit itself, which was attached to your staff report packet, is intended to be very straightforward, very simple to fill out. It's essentially a half-page application. We're asking applicants to submit a basic kind of sketched diagram of where the outdoor seating area is they plan to use and any furniture, temporary enclosures they would like to include. Staff will review that diagram to make sure, pedestrian, ADA, emergency access is maintained. And then the application itself actually becomes the permit the applicant signs as well as city staff. There are a handful of provisions included in the permit that outline the requirement for things like shade devices, temporary fencing, temporary signage, amplified sound, trash collection. We want to make sure that anything being installed, like shade devices or umbrellas, are secured, even if they're temporary, so they're not blowing over into pedestrian walkways or into drive aisles, and that areas are well maintained so they don't become a, detractor or deterrent to surrounding businesses. We believe in most cases the permit can be issued same day, over the counter. We can even review these via email, so it should be a quick turnaround. There are no fees associated with the application, and the permit will remain in effect until the close of the emergency period, and then I think we gave a 30-day grace period. The table set up on First Street the last couple of weekends to allow for outdoor dining was well received, and after those activities, we received requests from both downtown businesses as well as restaurants outside of the downtown to continue to allow for that expanded outdoor dining opportunity. So we're hoping this permit does kind of expand that opportunity for restaurants and retailers throughout the community. And with that, I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Does any member of the council have a question or comment for Erica Baumgartner, please?
Mr. Mayor, this is Councilmember Rodriguez.
Please.
Let me go ahead. Oh, thank you. Thank you for that presentation, Erica. And thank you to you too, Ken. I know I had conversations with you, Ken, and the mayor about businesses interested in expanding their operations, particularly businesses outside of the downtown area. And so I'm grateful for this coming to the council because it's going to expand to other businesses, that want to be included and that want to have the opportunity to operate and of course being in line with our policies at the council and city level. So we said, and I apologize, I kind of missed this. This would be for a length of how long?
It will carry us through the emergency period, so essentially into phase 4. And then there'll be a grace period to kind of demobilize any outdoor spaces that get set up. And certainly businesses, if it's proven successful for them, we can look at other ways to extend outdoor seating beyond the order if needed.
Okay. And in engaging and speaking to businesses, will email or in-person contact be the best way to reach out to you when folks are submitting applications?
Yeah, so we'll post the application on our economic development COVID page. We'll get it on our planning. We'll put it anywhere we think folks will be able to find it. We'll certainly put it in our next business newsletter, which goes out to over 800 businesses and hits most of the restaurants in town. And yeah, they're welcome to reach out to me. We have our staff in all departments kind of ready and familiar with the permit, and so they should be able to get rolling quickly, whoever they get in contact with.
Okay. All right, Erica. And I believe we're equipped if folks need assistance also in Spanish as well.
Yep, that's a great idea. We can translate our permit into Spanish tomorrow or the next day.
Okay, yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you so much. That's it for right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Rodriguez. Anybody else have a comment or question? I have a question for Erica and/or Mr. Hyatt. Some of these arrangements will be made on public property, is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
I'm a little worried about liability if we're going to be allowing alcohol in some of these places. How are we covered?
So businesses are required to provide us proof of their own insurance, really for their own protection. They also have to indemnify the city if they're on any public right-of-way through that liability coverage. The ABC has given some leeway, some latitude for businesses, again, trying to help them out with outdoor dining, but they will need to be in compliance with ABC regulation as well for the outdoor dining, and that's part of the permit application that they're signing.
Thank you. So in order to do this, you have to have the permit, right?
Correct.
So somebody says to me, so you're allowing drinking on First Street, what about City Park?
Yeah, so the provisions would only apply to the designated outdoor dining space, and restaurants are actually, there's a form that ABC has put out for restaurants to apply to ABC to expand their permit to include the additional outdoor spaces that the city will also allow them. So they would need a totally separate and different permit to operate in parks or anywhere else, which, yeah.
Yeah.
I get it, Eric. Thank you for that. But I think what we need to do is make sure that the general public understands that we're not just allowing carte blanche public drinking. We still have a public drinking ordinance, and that's not going to be vacated or amended. It's suspended in certain parts by permit. Is that correct?
So I'll jump in. So absolutely a good point to make sure we're messaging to the community where, consumption of alcohol in public spaces is allowed and where it's not going to be allowed. We are going to be putting together a press release relative to the ordinance that you guys are acting on this evening, and we can include in there some clarification for the community to know where it will be allowed. And really just to be clear, right, for the consumption of alcohol in a public space to be permitted, it has to be associated with one of these permits, and that permit has to be associated with a restaurant that is responsible for that space. And I don't see that, right, occurring in a public space that's disassociated with any of the restaurants, because there's no way that they can manage and monitor that space.
Right. If I could encourage you to work with Chief Caff to get that message out on his message board. He has more friends than we do. So let's let him publicize these differences between permitted spaces and non-permitted spaces.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that.
And I got a question.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
this is Mayor Pro Tem Stallard. I would just want to indicate my strong support for this. It's being done in other communities. The main reason is for social distancing. The restaurants don't have enough interior space in so many cases. And of course, for minimizing COVID transmission, outdoors is favored. So I think we're achieving a number of positive social policies. And I know we'll be diligent in working to make sure that there's no abuse of this. So I really support it. And when you're ready for a motion, I'm happy to move the item.
Okay, I thought I heard Councilmember Barajas. Angel, did you have a comment or question?
Yes, I too endorse this this moving forward because I think it's going to help our small business community, and I think it's just going to bring just people out and be able to gather and spend some of their money in downtown or in different areas of Woodland. But my question is, who's going to be monitoring and enforcing the social distancing order? Do we have to rely solely on the restaurant or the business establishment, or is this something that the county or city officials are going to check in from time to time?
Yeah, so as part of the permit application, we do ask for kind of a designated point of contact in person who will be responsible for monitoring social distancing as well as sanitization and everything else between guests. Environmental Health Department is coming out and visiting businesses, restaurants that are reopening to check, that they've met their, distancing requirements for new table setups, particularly indoors. But it'll be a little bit of a team effort, I think.
Okay, great. And if there's violations, is there going to be warnings, or is there a fine? What do the violations look like?
Yeah, so if we understand that there's a violation, at this point, our code enforcement officers are going out and just talking with the businesses to make sure, they understand what the rules are, what the guidelines are. We try to give the benefit of the doubt. We know it's going to be difficult as businesses, restaurants start up. Customers are getting sort of reacclimated to the new guidelines as well. So, at some point, if it becomes an issue, there's a warning issued, and then if it's just kind of a blatant disregard, then there is a penalty or a fine.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Barajas, the other thing I would note is that the ordinance does allow for the immediate revocation of the permit in the event that there is some sort of need to take action immediately.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Good comments, good questions. It sounded like there was a motion by Mr. Stallard and
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, this is Councilmember Rodriguez. I have one more question.
yes, please.
All right, for businesses operating outside of downtown, how are we going to handle requests for potential street closures? I know there's some businesses out there that count with lots adjacent to the property, but do we have an idea how we're going to handle any requests for potential street closures or additional city assistance?
Yeah, I think we'll have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. One of our big points of consideration is, emergency access and making sure if, there is a closure, temporary, semi-temporary, that our emergency response team can still get where they need to, or that they have alternative routes. We think in most cases, businesses outside of the downtown are, associated with a larger shopping center. So hopefully they can work within their, kind of shared parking area and set something up there, as opposed to being on a busier street, which isn't necessarily the best place to be sitting out and dining. But, if there's a case where that makes sense, we're happy to take a look at that.
Okay. Fantastic. That answers my question. Ready to second that motion.
Great. So we have a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Stallard, a second by Councilmember Rodriguez. Madam Clerk, a roll call vote, please.
Yes, thank you. Councilmember Barajas,
Yes.
Councilmember Fernandez,
Yes.
Mayor Landsberg,
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Stallard.
Yes.
Thank you. The item 14, which is urgency ordinance number 1664, carries on a 5-0 vote.
Thank you. Eric, I want to thank you. You're reading your staff report and the application, did a great job, good details. Thank you for that work. Appreciate it very much. That's going to move us to item J15, Measure J. Mr. Hyatt.
Yes, so at the April 21st meeting of the City Council, the council took action to direct staff to prepare the required ordinance and resolutions necessary to have the renewal of the quarter-cent sales tax Measure J, presented to the voters this November. So before you this evening, I believe the city clerk's going to be pulling up some slides for us to walk through. Is several actions. First is an introduction of the ordinance. That would be necessary to reauthorize the extension of the quarter-cent sales tax for general city services. It will include programs and facilities for a period of 10 years. On, if you can move to the next slide. So we're seeking simply an introduction of the ordinance. At the June 16th meeting, the council will actually have the final ordinance on the agenda on consent for adoption. So we're seeking your input and comment tonight, both on that ordinance language as well as the draft ballot language that will ultimately be on the November 3rd ballot to approve the measure. And we're seeking direction from council. Should you be comfortable with how we framed the measure and the ordinance to come back at the 16th with a resolution calling for the consolidation of the election and placing the 4 advisory measures on the ballot. Next slide on it. So before you, the measure that we want feedback on, concurrence with the council before we come back on the 16th. The draft language we have here for the quarter-cent sales tax measure itself is worded very similar to how it was presented to the voters back in 2008. So the measure would state, shall the measure, which would authorize the city of Woodland to continue to collect for a period of 10 years a quarter-cent sales tax for general city services, providing approximately $2.8 million annually, and would not increase taxes, be adopted. So unlike the original measure, this would be an extension of the current measure and would not increase taxes, but rather be an extension. So a slight modification there. Before we move on to maybe the advisory measures, any questions or comments from the council on the wording for the quarter-cent sales tax?
Does any member of the council have a question or comment? Hearing none, let's go.
Good, and I think I failed to mention, so you note here that there's a 10-year period assigned for the measure in this language. The current Measure J is scheduled to sunset in 2022. So if this were to pass in November, the quarter-cent sales tax would continue through 2032. And should the council, similar to its current situation, be interested at that time to want to present to the voters the option to continue it, we would likely be before the voters in 2030 with a consideration for extension. All right, next slide. So accompanying the ballot measure for the quarter cent, similar again to how Measure J was presented to the voters, we would have 4 companion advisory measures. The first measure, as drafted here, would call for advisory vote only, but should the city collect 25% of the sales tax revenue collected from any sales tax measure reauthorizing the city of Woodland via the November 2020 ballot to the Woodland Public Library to enhance educational and literacy programs and maintain or expand hours of operation. Very similar again to the advisory measure that was on the ballot before. As the council has given previous direction, we are increasing the allocation to the public library, in this case to 25% from the 20% that was previously voted on. So any comments or questions from the council on this measure?
Not for me. Anybody else? Oh, keep going.
All right, so the next advisory measure would be for the recreation teen programming. In this case, again, the similar language to what the voters saw with the original Measure J, lowering the original percentage of 60% to 55%, taking that 5% and allocating it to the library effectively. So language here, as you can read, shall the city council allocate 55% of the tax revenue collected from any sales tax measure reauthorized by the city of Woodland via the November 2020 ballot to expand and enhance youth team programs and facilities and reduction of fees charged for use of city recreational facilities. Any questions or comments on that advisory measure?
Nope. Keep going.
All right. So the next advisory measure is for public safety. In this case, 15% would be allocated. Would it be to be reauthorized on the 2020 ballot to enhance public safety through expanded crime prevention programs and services supporting opportunities for youth within the community? And then the last advisory measure, again, very similar, if not identical to what was voted on by the voters, Measure J, which would authorize 5% of the sales tax revenue to support utility ratepayer assistance program for seniors and low-income families. I believe those are consistent with what the council gave us direction on. Any comments that we received from you this evening will be incorporated into the final resolution ordinance before you on the 16th. Anna, if you can move to the next slide, please. So to provide the council community with...
Back up to the other slide, please. Sorry, I was muted.
Oh, sorry. Back, Anna, one more.
Oh, no. The one with the seniors in it, that one. Should that not say low-income seniors?
Well, currently the ratepayer assistance program is available for seniors and low-income families. Kim, I don't believe for a senior to qualify, do they need to be low-income qualifying?
They do. It's the primary qualifying factor is low income. You have to prove that you participate in the PG&E care program.
Okay, so if we reworded it, program for low-income seniors and families,
yeah,
that would be more accurate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because, you know, there are some pretty well-off seniors out there.
Right.
And what would stop them from applying for this fund?
So ultimately, right, this is advisory language. The policy itself that the council adopts for the ratepayer assistance program would dictate, but certainly good practice to be consistent and clear in the advisory measure.
Okay, thank you.
Make sure that correction is made.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
Councilmember Fernandez, could I make a comment on the second to last advisory measure? So forgive me, I don't have the slides in front of me, so I'm just going off of memory. But in addition to having the measure state crime prevention programming, is that accurate? Is that an accurate statement? Right? Do I have that right?
Yeah, it says crime prevention programs and services.
Crime prevention. Yeah. You know, I don't know if it's appropriate, and I'm not like by any means attached to this, but you know, if we could provide some additional language like attached to that, that you know is along the lines of community building or community strengthening or community, growth. I think that would allow us greater flexibility in helping strengthen communities that are grappling with very serious issues. That's it for me. Anyone hear me?
I hear you, Mr. Hyatt. Are you?
Yeah, sorry, I'm reading the sentence, seeing if I could come up with a suggestion that would address Councilmember Fernandez's suggestion here. Probably take a little bit more time. If the council desires, we can work through that and come back on the 16th with a modified statement that incorporates that concept.
I think if you ran it by council members individually through email, that would be sufficient if that's okay with the council.
Kara,
Yeah, go ahead and run it through email. That'd be fine.
So why don't we work on the language and then we can perhaps run the language by Councilmember Fernandez and perhaps the mayor, and then bring it back. It'll be back to you in the form of a resolution calling the election. And then if there are further concerns, we can always wordsmith a little bit more at the next meeting.
Okay, that's why we asked you. Okay, keep going, Ken.
okay, so Lana, if you could move to the slide that sort of walks through how the revenue would be allocated. Again, we estimate based on our current revenue collection through the quarter-cent sales tax measure J. By the time this goes into effect, if it were to be approved, we'd be looking at about 2.8 million in annual revenue to be allocated. Breaking down the percentages, as you see here, the library would receive 700,000 of that annual allocation. Teen programs, 1.5 million roughly. Crime prevention, 420, and the utility ratepayer assistance at 5% would receive 140,000. Those numbers obviously are estimates at this time and would be adjusted based on the actual revenues collected. I do want to point out that the ordinance does call for, similar to the current ordinance in practice, that the city provide an annual report on the expenditure and use of the funds, and that report be published and available to the public. So it would require reporting of how the funds are allocated consistent with the advisory measures. And ultimately, as you know, the council does have some discretion to modify these allocations as the companion measures are advisory, but to maintain the public trust and respect for their preference for how the allocation would occur. The city has been consistent with adhering to those allocations and would continue to do so. All right, last slide, Anna. So before you this evening is the introduction of the ordinance that is attached to your staff report. Appreciate the ballot language comments. We will address those and bring those back on the 16th with the final resolution for consideration. And ask the council if they have any remaining questions before we package the item back to you on the 16th. I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So there's no action to be taken on this tonight, right?
Well, if the council wanted to direct staff to return to the council with a resolution calling for the consolidation, that would be consistent with the staff report and give clear guidance to staff.
Mr. Mayor, this is Kara. The ordinance does need to be introduced tonight.
All right, so do we need a vote to do that?
Yes, so there would be a vote to introduce the ordinance. And the reason why is because that requires 2 readings. And so at your next meeting, you would have approval of that ordinance.
Got it, okay.
I'll move
Is there a
to,
motion to introduce ordinance
Yeah.
reauthorize an extension of the courtesan sales tax measure J. Motion by
Barajas.
Barajas and
Second by
seconded by
Stallard.
Stallard. Madam Clerk?
Yes, Councilmember Barajas,
Yes.
Councilmember Fernandez,
Yes.
Mayor Landsberg,
Yes.
Councilmember Rodriguez,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Stallard.
Yes.
Thank you. Item 15 carries on a roll call vote 5-0.
Thank you, Mr. Hyatt, on that topic. That takes us to item J16, budget.
Good. So the last item for you this evening for consideration is the introduction of the fiscal year 2021 budget. This is the second to last action you'll be taking on next year's budget. You've had much discussion to date and input relative to how to respond to recent economic impacts that have adjusted our fiscal forecast. And as you know, we're looking at significant downgraded revenues translating to significant shortfalls in our budget, which at the last meeting, we introduced to you a balancing plan that in a simple manner was addressed through three measures. One, a partial access of the general fund reserve, which we currently have roughly 27% general fund reserve, which is 7% over the general or the city council's policy for 20% reserve fund. We had also asked departments to represent to the city administration a balancing plan that would provide reductions in their department budgets and programs. 5% for all departments other than police and fire, where we asked for 2.5%. The council reviewed those at your last meeting. We outlined those in a three-tier format, with tier one being proposed to be incorporated into next year's budget. Roughly about $1 million in baseline general fund savings. And then the third measure to deliver a balanced budget for next year was an assumption in potential concessions from our labor groups relative to their employment contracts. So the budget that's before you this evening, and Kim will walk you through the modified budget projection for next year, balancing plan, as well as the 5-year forecast adjusted that incorporates the tier one measures. There were tier two as well as tier three reduction measures also presented to the council and discussed. Again, want to reiterate that both the tier two and tier three are not proposed to be incorporated into the budget at this time. Those are simply a balancing plan should, as we go throughout the next fiscal year, our revenues and to some degree costs get out of alignment with our proposed budget and anticipated revenues associated with the recessionary scenario we presented. So I would project as early as September of next year, as we get our sales tax and some of the development revenue projections begin to come into focus, be back to the council with a discussion about whether it's necessary to potentially implement any of the tier two or tier three reduction measures. But at this time, those items are not included. So with that, Kim, if you wouldn't mind walking the council through proposed budget numbers. In addition to the general fund 5-year forecast and budget, we're also presenting the capital improvement program, which you have reviewed before, as well as the department summaries and organization and associated positions that would be funded and approved as part of the budget. With that, I'll turn it over to Kim.
Sorry about that. Okay, so city manager covered a lot of information there, a lot of it's included already in the budget, and so I won't spend a lot of time on it, but here's a look at the general fund 5-year forecast that we've been bringing before you for a couple of meetings now. This is what we're including in the proposed budget that we'll be asking you to approve at the next council meeting. As with the previous forecast, the second green column is where we are projecting to end the fiscal year that we're in right now, based on revised revenue assumptions, we're expecting to have a shortfall of about $840,000 this year. We already had some one-time money approved in the budget. Consistent with what we talked about last time, moving forward, the $1 million that was originally set aside for future construction of a fire station, we have removed that from the general fund budget for this year. And we can always revisit that at a future time if we need to, but for now we're leaving that $1 million available in the fund balance. So projecting to end this year with a $13.2 million fund balance, which, as Ken mentioned, is about 27%, which is in excess of the 20% target, totaling about $3.5 million. The proposed budget for next year, which was based on what we were calling scenario A before, which was a more moderate version of a recession in the general fund revenues. It also includes the tier 1 reductions that we discussed at the last meeting, which I'll briefly cover in a moment, as well as savings expected from employee concessions in their bargaining groups. So that would result in a shortfall in the general fund of about $120,000. There's $430,000 of one-time money that we're proposing to be allocated in the budget. And then we would end the year with about a $12.7 million fund balance, or 26%. You can see the forecast moving forward. We still have work to do next year, and in the 5-year outlook. We continue to include in the expenditure number estimated additional PERS impact from the performance of the investment market this year, as well as some moderate to limited growth in revenues for the next 2 fiscal years. So again, if we don't make any changes, we would fall below our 20% general fund reserve target beginning in fiscal year 23, and would run out of general fund reserves altogether in fiscal year 24. So more work to do, but we have come up with a plan for balancing the budget this year. This is kind of small. This is the tier 1 reductions that we talked about that are already included in the numbers that we just discussed. And this came from a combination of a couple of items. Majority were from the departments providing expenditure reduction scenarios when we gave them the targets of 5% or 2.5%, depending on the department. And so they're all listed in here. They're all in the staff report. We were also able to come up with reallocation of funding for a couple of existing positions. And we also received help from some of the JPAs or other agencies that the city contributes to in response to a request for 5% savings in their budgets from the various city managers in the counties. Included in tier 1 is the eliminating funding for 2 full-time positions. Neither one of those are filled right now, so eliminating 2 vacant positions in this tier saves just over $1 million in the general fund. And outside the general fund, related to our transportation program, we are including the downgrade of 1 existing maintenance supervisor position. So tiers 2 and 3, which we've talked about before, and I show here again, are for planning purposes. We are not including these and not asking for these to be approved when we bring the budget back to you at the next council meeting. But they are a plan that can be implemented in the event that our revenue performance indicates that we need to provide additional reductions. So tier 2 would include elimination of funding for 3 full-time positions that are 2 of which are filled. It also would reduce funding that we normally set aside each year for retiree medical contribution. And then in tier 3, there's eliminating funding for an additional 3 positions, 1 of which is filled right now and would save $700,000. So as we've discussed before, there's $1.3 million almost here available in additional budget savings that we can implement at a future date, and we would certainly be back before council talking about the budget before any of these are implemented. Also included in the budget that we've provided to you are some additional funding recommendations. In the general fund, they're all one-time recommendations totaling $432,000, the largest of which is the one-time set aside of money for replacement of our enterprise-wide software system, and then some additional one-time money for priority needs that we will continue to revisit. There was lots of other funding requests we weren't able to accommodate, and we will obviously, as we do every year, but even more so this year, monitoring our revenues and come back to revisit those funding requests. Again, we talk a lot about the general fund. We have a lot of other funds, a lot of funding needs outside the general fund as well. We are proposing and including almost $2.5 million of one-time money, again, the bulk of which is for replacement of our enterprise-wide software and some purchase of equipment in the sewer funds that need to be replaced and have reached the end of their useful life, as well as some maintenance projects on city facilities. So in total, there's $3 million of funding included in the budget that we will be asking you to approve next week, the bulk of which is one-time funding. This is a history that we included in the in the attachments to the staff report, but just as a reminder of the staffing trends for the city kind of pre-recession and how we've been recovering from that point forward. So starting out in 2008-9, we had 352.5 full-time positions that dipped down to a low of 274 in fiscal year 14 and have went back as high as 313 for the current year. And because we're eliminating funding for 2 positions in tier 1 of the general fund this year, that's dropping back down to 311. Quite a few of those positions we were able to fill as a result of measures J and measures F, allowing us to hire additional staffing, as well as the receipt of some grants for fire staffing. So this just is a reminder, we've made some progress recovering, but we still remain below the full-time equivalent positions that we had pre-recession. Also what you've seen before, and just as a reminder, again, the Measure J quarter-cent sales tax that we have includes a spending plan that we brought to you in May, and this proposed budget is consistent with what we discussed. The baseline number here continues to fund all of the programs that we have been funding through Measure J for the last several years, and we have included some additional funding down here. We moved the graffiti program out of the general fund and over to Measure J to provide some balancing in the general fund. We're allocating some additional hours to the library to allow for additional programming at the Square One facility, and then $150,000 of one-time money for some library improvements in the main floor and some furnishings. So this again is consistent with what we brought to you before. It is using up a little bit of fund balance in Measure J next year, but still has a pretty decent reserve in Measure J, and we will again continue to monitor the revenue performance here, and also we'll know more about how Measure J might continue, assuming that it appears in the November 2020 election. Measure F, again, we also brought the spending plan to you at the same time that we discussed J earlier in May. This is a reminder that in our baseline budget in Measure J, this right here, continues to allocate money to the same functional areas. We still have a set aside to assist with debt service payments for the community sports park and community senior center debt. This is again assuming that we may not collect enough in development impact fees, and we will continue to revisit that in the event that we don't need all of that money. And there's also a small amount of money in here to supplement the funding for replacement of the turf at the sports park. We continue to allocate $2.5 million towards road projects, police staffing includes 3 sworn police officers and 2 fire staffing positions, as well as some temporary staff in the police department, and then a staff position in economic development. As part of the balancing plan for the general fund, we propose to reallocate an additional police officer out of the general fund, and it will be paid for out of Measure F. So there'll be 4 police officers paid for by Measure F beginning next year. And again, we still are forecasting to have a little over $1 million available in fund balance and Measure F, and we will continue, as we do with the other funds, to monitor the performance of sales tax revenues there as well. Another large part of our budget is our capital improvement program, which we brought to you again back in May. This updated numbers fairly consistent. There was 1 or 2 projects added in here or corrected in the allocation, but for next fiscal year, we're proposing $33.3 million in capital improvement projects, the majority of which are in the transportation or roads category with almost $18 million. And the large component of funding there is grants that we've been able to secure as a city and that supplement Measure E and F money and other transportation funds that the city gets. Just a couple of highlights of major projects that are included in the capital improvement program. I alluded before to the sports park turf replacement project, provides an additional $1.1 million to supplement money that was already allocated this year so that we can begin the process of replacing the turf out of the sports park. And that's funded by primarily Measure E and supplemented by Measure F. Under the transportation and road category, there's several large projects. There's East Main Street Improvement Project. There's completion of the West Woodland Safe Routes to School project, which recently came to the council for discussion. There's the Gibson Road Bike and Mobility Project, which is improvements on Gibson Road from East Street to West Street, and again has a large component of grant funding in there. And then continuation of work on Gibson Road between West Street and County Road 98 for about $5 million, which is including Measures F funding as well as other transportation money and gas tax money that the city gets. In the utilities section, there's a large water and sewer main replacement projects on Gum and Marshall Streets for $4.6 million to replace very old infrastructure that is failing and needs to be replaced. And the funding for this was already planned for in the rates that are currently approved and charged to utility customers. And finally, under the other category, we have a little over $2 million allocated for the Sports Park Drive pedestrian overcross project. And as I mentioned a couple of times now, $2.25 million allocated for replacement of the city's enterprise system, which is our accounting, utility billing, human resources licensing software that is being phased out, and we have no choice but to replace it. So that's just a highlight again of the capital, a couple of large projects included in the $33 million capital improvement program. So I quickly went through a lot of information. I think none of that should have been surprising. It just kind of is putting everything together that we've been talking about and will be included in what we would be asking to officially approve at the June 16th council meeting. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kim. Any member of council have a question or comment for Kim regarding the presentation on the budget? Apparently not. I want to thank you for putting the books together, Kim. Very comprehensive. That's probably why you don't have a lot of questions. It's all in the book. If you read the book, the answers are there. No other comments? Nothing to do on this one, right, Ken's presentation?
Yeah, that concludes the budget presentation. I do want to make sure if clerk can indicate if there's any public comments that have been received on the budget. We give an opportunity to read those to the record.
Good idea. Madam Clerk, any comments from the public on item 16?
No.
Hearing none. That concludes the presentation on item 16. That takes us to item K. At this time, I'm going to be asking council and staff to observe 8 minutes and 46 seconds of silence in memory of George Floyd. We're going to have a timer on this. At the conclusion of the 8 minutes, 46 seconds, will be an adjournment. Good night.
Good night, Rich. Good night, Woodland.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.